What if you spent your whole life dreaming about living in a fantasy world, and then one day, completely out of nowhere, that dream actually came true? No warning, no tutorial, no heroic backstory. You just wake up, except you didn't come back as the chosen hero with a glowing sword and a destiny. You didn't get the cool magic system or the royal bloodline. Instead, you open your eyes and realize you're inside the body of a massive, terrifying barbarian, stranded in a frozen wasteland packed with monsters, surrounded by people who can barely string a sentence together with absolutely no idea how you got there. What are barbarians? Before we meet our main character, let's talk about what barbarians actually are in this world, because they are not what you'd expect. Barbarians live in a place called the White Wasteland. Think sub-zero temperatures and monsters lurking around every corner. It's the kind of place that entire armies have marched into and never returned from. The only food source is monster meat, strong enough to tear monsters apart with their bare hands. Meet Katal. Our main character wakes up in the body of one of these barbarians. His name in this new life is Katal. Back on Earth, he was an otaku, deeply obsessed with fantasy novels, video games, and the idea of living in a world full of magic and adventure. He always dreamed of it. He spent years reading about it. And then one day, without any warning or explanation, that wish came true in the most inconvenient way imaginable. He never found out how it happened. There was no time to figure it out, because from the moment he woke up, surviving in a frozen wasteland full of monsters demanded his complete attention. Stay alive in those early days, he organized the brainless barbarians around him into a clan and took the lead. Not because he wanted to be a barbarian king. Years passed. He grew enormously powerful, strong enough to destroy monsters, intimidate creatures that would send entire armies running. But every escape plan he tried failed. There was some invisible force keeping him locked inside the wasteland. Then one day, a system window appeared, right in front of him, like a notification from a game he'd been unknowingly playing. It told him he could earn his freedom if he completed a series of quests, like the RPGs he used to love back home. Katal didn't hesitate for even a second. The noble carriage. While Katal was grinding quests deep in the wasteland, a noble's carriage was making its way through the frozen terrain, which, to be clear, is absolutely insane. Nobody willingly travels through the White Wasteland. The mercenaries hired to guard the carriage were already questioning their life choices. One was complaining about frostbite. Their muscular blonde captain told him to layer up or freeze. Another guard joined the protest. This was a suicide mission, prize or no prize. The captain shut them down. They'd signed contracts. Complaints weren't changing anything. Inside the magically heated carriage sat Lady Milena, the noble daughter of the Akasha family. Her butler, a loyal, fussy old man, was doing his best to keep her informed about the dangers outside. He told her the legend of a great emperor who had once marched into the White Wasteland with thousands of warriors and soldiers when he finally returned, alone, half mad, gripping a walking stick. All he could say was that the monsters were terrifying, yes, but the most dangerous things in the wasteland weren't the monsters at all. They were the barbarians. Elena found the legend fascinating. The butler insisted it was just a story. Then the captain outside shouted for everyone to stop. Something was approaching. Good news. It was small in size. Bad news. The captain had no idea if it was human or something straight out of that legend. Katal makes first contact. The thing approaching them was Katal, walking up at a casual pace, completely unbothered. He introduced himself politely, mentioned he'd gotten tired of looking at the other barbarians, and asked if the carriage needed an extra mercenary. The entire guard unit went dead silent. The captain couldn't believe what he was hearing. A barbarian, the legendary barbarian, was asking to be hired? When the captain nervously asked whether Catal had any hostile intentions, our guy just smiled and replied, "If I did, you'd already be dead." Not exactly reassuring, but technically accurate, and everyone standing there knew it. The captain relayed everything to Milena inside the carriage. She asked one simple question: what were their odds if they tried to fight it? The captain said he wasn't even going to think about that. Milena made the smart call: hire him. Catal climbed into the carriage, sat down next to the visibly uncomfortable butler, and asked everyone to relax. He wasn't there to hurt anyone. Milena, composed, sharp, and clearly used to handling difficult situations. Catal noticed the carriage was somehow warm despite the blizzard raging outside and asked how that was possible. Milena answered, "Magic." The otaku inside Catal quietly exploded with excitement. Then he laid out his terms. He'd protect them through the wasteland. All he wanted in return was knowledge of the world beyond the snow. Milena found it an unusual request, but she was smart enough to know she had no real alternative. She agreed. The butler looked like he'd rather take his chances with the monsters outside. The world beyond the snow. As the carriage pushed on, Milena held up her end of the deal. She told Catal about the ongoing war between a massive empire and a smaller kingdom. The empire was steadily gaining the upper hand, and the kingdom's survival rested on two legendary figures defending the borders: a swordmaster and a hero. When Catal asked what made them so powerful, Milena introduced him to the concept of mystery, the core power system of this world. Think of it like a hidden force that exists within people, but most can't even sense it. Those who can are ranked on a 5-tier scale. At the lowest end are people who can simply feel mystery, then those who can actively use it, then those who can manifest it into real, tangible power: mana for mages, aura for fighters, summoning ability for spirit users. These are first-rate individuals. Above that are transcendents, people who can reshape mystery with pure willpower alone. And at the absolute peak stands the hero, someone said to hold power great enough to influence the world itself. For Catal, hearing all of this was like reading the opening chapter of his favorite fantasy novel, except it was real, and he was already inside it. He immediately decided he needed to meet every single one of these people. The carriage jerked to a sudden stop. Outside, a massive black slime monster with glowing red eyes blocking the path. Everyone froze. The blonde captain barely managed to identify it. A black slime, one of the creatures mentioned in old expedition records, from people who'd been brave or foolish enough to enter the wasteland. Rare, dangerous, notoriously hard to kill. Catal looked at it and casually mentioned that black slimes were actually quite chewy and delicious. When Milena asked, horrified, if he seriously ate these things as food, he offered to let her go catch her own if she wanted a taste. She declined firmly. Catal leaned back and announced he'd only step in if someone was actually going to die. He wanted to see what the outsiders were capable of first. The mercenaries fought hard. It wasn't clean or pretty, but they coordinated. Shields up, flanking strikes, targeting the core, and eventually brought the slime down. Barely. Before anyone could catch their breath, a massive white bear appeared from the snow. They took that one down too. Faster and more confident this time. The group was starting to feel like maybe the wasteland's reputation was exaggerated. Then, a colossal serpent rose up with blazing red eyes and declared it was going to have itself a full meal today. Starting with every single one of them, the entire group went rigid with fear. Catal stepped forward. His body began radiating a deep, intense purple energy. He told the serpent calmly but firmly to back off. These people were under his protection now. The serpent recognized him instantly and tried to invoke the territorial rules of the wasteland. There were ancient protocols about who could operate where, and Catal was technically out of his zone. Catal was not interested in that conversation. He charged in and flattened the snake with a single punch that shook the ground like a minor earthquake. The fight ended before most of the guards had fully registered that it had started. Milena's real mission, back inside the carriage. With the mercenaries now shivering in the snow outside as a small lesson in who was actually in charge, Catal turned to Milena with a calm expression and laid out what she was actually doing. She was smuggling weapons to the kingdom. She'd taken the wasteland route specifically to avoid the Empire's trade inspectors, and her family was in financial ruin. This dangerous trip was their absolute last shot at saving the Akasha name. Milena stared at him. She hadn't told him any of this. He'd pieced it all together from the sound of metal clanging in the wagon, from the war she'd described, from the route they were taking, from the logic of who would desperately need weapons right now. Nobody expected a barbarian to think this clearly. The more she looked at him, the less he fit any description of a barbarian she'd ever heard. The parting and the pendant. They finally reached the edge of the wasteland. Green land stretched out ahead of them. Actual grass, real trees, colors that weren't white. The group prepared to go their separate ways. Milena thanked Catal sincerely. He smiled. And then, before she could say anything else, laid out her entire long-term plan without missing a beat. She was going to use this successful mission to prove her value to the family, rebuild the Akasha name, rise through the ranks until she was no longer treated as a discarded concubine's daughter, but a real, recognized force in her own right. He'd read stories like hers 100 times. Back on Earth, they called it the classic underdog arc. She offered him a place by her side when she eventually reached the top. He turned her down politely. He still had unfinished business. Instead, she pressed a pendant into his hand bearing the Akasha family crest. She told him to find her when he finally made it out into the real world. He took it with a quiet smile and didn't ask too many questions. The butler gave a formal farewell. They parted ways, and Catal turned back toward the wasteland to keep grinding. 5 years later, Catal completed his 784th quest. The system window appeared one final time with the message he'd been working toward for what felt like a life. He was free. The invisible force that had kept him bound inside the white wasteland finally let go. He stepped out of the snow for the first time in his entire existence. Thank you so much for watching and for being here right from the very first video. It truly means a lot. See you in part 2.